So Kelsey, it's 12:05. Do you want to kick us off with Monse? You're on mute, love.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We're all just so very practiced at this by now. Definitely never any issues. Okay, so Joel got back to me and isn't going to be able to make it. A client emergency came up, unfortunately, and that's something that very much happens in our line of work. So, so first of all, what I was hoping that we could get out of this today is, first of all, to introduce the panelists who are able to make it and kind of what is your background. And then I've got some questions prepared. We're hoping to take some questions from the audience as well at the end. But the main thing we want to know is, how do we best serve our clients who are LGBTQ and Latino, and many of whom are transgender and many of whom are Indigenous, without compromising the quality of our care? So Monserrat is a fantastic advocate for our community. She works with WISN and has been a huge effort in coordinating and achieving the release of our 14 trans women who were transferred from Santa Fe to Tacoma. All of them got out of the detention centers. So I just want to let you all know how amazing Monse is. And with that, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. It is an honor to be here with you all today. It's Monday, nice and sunny here in Seattle, and so that's always a good thing to keep us hopeful. My name is Monserrat Padilla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am undocumented and unafraid, transgender and unashamed. I came to this country when I was 2 years old. I'm 27 now, and I am one of the directors of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network that came together shortly after the election results in 2016. Knowing and understanding that what we were going to live under this administration was going to be a very tough environment, that it would create suffocating conditions for our communities to survive and thrive. And so what I've been working for the last 3 years has been building a powerful coalition of over 250 organizations to build a defense line whenever immigration came knocking at the door, Immigration Custom Enforcement or Custom Border Patrol, when they attempt to terrorize our communities, ripping us apart. And so my work is to build that defense line so our communities are ready to defend themselves and to continue dismantling the detention and deportation machine so that we can continue to stay healthy and with our families. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, one of the things that is really important when doing any cultural competency training is, Monse, it sounds like you're a member of this community. Can you speak for everyone in that community?
Definitely no. I definitely cannot. Even through this work, I'm in constant reflection of my own needs and my own experiences and my own ability to support while also navigating my own systems. I am someone who also needs access to healthcare. I'm someone who also needs immigration representation. I'm someone who also sometimes wonders if there's going to be enough, food at the table. And so while I speak to my broader community's needs, what I can do is organize my community to fight back, to organize ourselves and to unify our voices by collectively sharing our stories. And so that has been a little bit of my work to inspire courage, courage that has been taught through me from my parents and my community, so that others can also feel unafraid and unashamed. So, but I will try my best, but I've heard from you.
Well, I think we finally figured out what the issue is with Silah, so I'm hoping she can be joining in the next couple of minutes here. As we see what happens with that, I just wanted to go ahead and get started by asking, what are some of the basic things that somebody should know about if someone is themselves an attorney and maybe familiar with the LGBT community a little bit? What are some things that they would need to know about the differences with working with people who are from a Latino, Latinx, or Latin American background?
I think one of my first lessons learned, so just a little preempt of my organizing experience. I started organizing when I was 17. I was one of the founders of the Washington Dream Coalition. In that time, I was still navigating my own identity of coming out as a queer man, cis man back then. And through that moment, I remember I also was, I had the opportunity to serve as a national coordinator for the Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project, where we launched a national survey with over 500 folks who were undocumented and LGBTQ. The report is called No More Closets of United We Dream. And one of the major things that folks should understand is that our Latinx community, when you just say LGBTQ community, assuming that people understand LGBTQ is the first concept that people don't always know what LGBTQ means. And even our folks from our own community, I remember telling my mom after having a position being the national LGBTQ coordinator, after like 2 years into my job, I told her, you do know what I do, right? And she's like, yeah, you work. I was like, do you know what LGBTQ means? And she's like, oh no, I don't know what that means. And so it's a constant thing that we sometimes assume that people know what the word LGBTQ means in Spanish. And there's just different terms to approach it. And so that also means for folks in our community, finding our own identity is a process that I feel it's an American approach. And so when we're traveling from our countries, we don't often have that opportunity to find our own identities. And so we're facing that for the first time many in this country. And that's a great thing, but it's also something that people need to be supported through that process.
So Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx, what's your experience with these terms, Monse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a constant. I myself personally identify as Latinx. I feel included within that identity and that realm of support. I think that when I engage with folks who are Latinx, I understand that there's this beyond recognition of who I am as a whole person, as someone who comes as a Latino, but also gets to be queer and free, and without there's this disconnection from the patriarchy when I talk here of Latinx, and so I'm able to feel more free. And so, however, I think one of the things that earlier on in my identity of Latinx, the struggle of knowing that at what point do I want to separate myself from my parents, from the way that they've grew up and experienced the world. And so it's a constant struggle to just be able to navigate that identity. But I think that more and more, as we clarify our parents more in their ideas, it's becoming more welcoming, not only for me, but also for other folks who might not identify as the LGBTQ spectrum, but are becoming more aware of other communities' needs. And so for me personally, I identify preferably as Latinx, knowing that Latino, Latina is an experience that my parents felt, and I want to be able to bridge those worlds together.
Okay, and what about, how is the LGBTQ community frequently referred to among Latino, Latinx groups and Spanish speakers? Because I can tell you one thing, as an English speaker who also speaks Spanish, I have learned that most people don't say la comunidad LGBTQ. I think you might have frozen.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, we can hear you just fine.
Can you hear me, Kelsey?
I can. Okay, looks like we're having a little bit of connectivity issues there as well. Let's see.
All right, I apologize. My internet might have kicked me out. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think what the broader way that I've heard it, how communities are referred to as la comunidad gay, which is the broader gay community, or la comunidad transexual, which is the trans community. I think that the identity of trans and transgender in the broader Latinx community is still an identity that, again, comes from the United States, that has a broader political movement in the United States, and that in the Latinx countries, we continue to see folks personally identifying as transsexual, transvesti, terms that I've learned that my sisters feel you know, very proud of, and that I'm also, again, supportive of, and being able to champion that. But I think that that's some of the different terms that I've seen within my broader community identify as. So gay, transsexual, transvesti, in different identities.
Awesome. So I'm going to be a little bit creative here as I work with getting Silah on. But one last question before we do that. What are some of the basic history or cultural background that you think would be useful to know about people who are Latinx? You know, are there any broader cultural or religious trends?
I think most of our cultural experiences, this notion of coming out of the closet is an important notion to note, that there's this great artist, and specifically Mexico, Juan Gabriel, who many of us our parents grew up watching. And there was this great saying that he would refer to, that things that you see, you don't ask. Yes, Juanga, I see folks talking about Juanga. La cosa que se ve no se preguntan. And I think that that's actually a very real way on how, in terms of my own experience growing up, when I came out to my parents, this notion that they already knew was very apparent when I came out. And so as we look at Latin American countries, the closet it looks very differently for us. It actually has been our home. And our entire home has known of who we've been and who we have always known to be. And it's this understanding that you just don't ask it, right? And so this is why oftentimes our communities, when we find these new terms, when we're in this country, there's new identities, this broader world and spectrum, it's hard to navigate because we didn't have to really find a box for ourselves in Latin American countries, because it was part of our home. And so that is something that's cultural, and I think that it's a moment of political education, and also not being forced to, people don't have to be forced to identify as trans. If people identify as transsexual or transvesti, then that's where folks feel comfortable with, and championing and supporting that, right? And I think understanding the differences, that people sometimes don't need to be American, this concept of how we view the world as Americans doesn't always have to go into other countries. Sometimes we can also just sit back, listen, and learn from others.
Thank you so much. So I've been creative. We have Silah joining us. Silah, can you hear me all right?
Barely.
Okay.
I can barely hear you.
Barely. Okay, I'll try speaking into your microphone a little better then.
Could you try calling me to the direct line from the office? My direct line. I think it's gonna be better.
Okay, I will try that. One moment.
Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I was trying to bring Silah on. We're gonna try a different method. I swear I'm doing my best here. So one of the things that I wanted to ask about specifically is what are some of the nuances when working with transgender Latinx folks? What is, because what I have observed is that even among La Comunidad, there's sort of a partitioning, much like in the American kind of trans community and gay community. There's a little bit of a partitioning sometimes between folks who are gay, folks who are cisgender, and then folks who are gender nonconforming, or maybe, can you speak a little bit to what the LGBTQ community looks like within the Latinx community?
I think it looks very much like the broader Latinx community is rich and diverse. It comes with different socioeconomic classes, different educational backgrounds, in different languages, right? I think that that's one of the things that, as we talk about the broader Latin American countries and folks who identify as LGBTQ, there's just a lot of different, there's a rich diversity. And so one of the things that we see here in Washington State especially is the places where we feel comfortable in coming out and being a part of the community, right? And for example, when you are LGBTQ Latinx in Central Washington, and you often are there because you're an H2A worker, there's just different spaces to be free. And, you know, just your background become, you know, your opportunity to feel liberated is different because there's different spaces based on your geographic region. And so, again, I think that our communities are still finding opportunities to become more liberated. And I think that it's all about our LGBTQ Latinx identities are tied to our economic reality and our geographic location. And the more that we have spaces to institutions like Entre, Hermanos, to institutions like the Q Law and YSIM become more free. And so that I know for a fact for myself, I am very grateful to my own organizing experience because I was someone who, you know, grew up without these institutions in my life. And as I became more aware in terms of my organizing spaces, I found the courage to come out and become more authentic in my being. And so that's what I would say. I think that we continue to live and reflect the realities of our environments, and that we continue to have to survive in different spaces. And one of the ways that we can become more liberated as a community is by continuing to funnel resources to our communities across geographic locations, so that folks have that opportunity to find themselves through a supported network.
Awesome. So I've got Silah from a better phone now. And I wanted to ask, first of all, Silah, can you tell us what is your experience, where you hail from, how you fit into the LGBTQ community and the Latino, Latina, Latinx communities?
I'm Silah. I work with Entre Hermanos as a trans navigator, and I come from a family that was very conservative, and it took me a while it took me a long time to actually come out as a gay male at the beginning, at first, and then later on in my life as a transgender. You know, there are so many aspects, you know, because family is big in our, you know, in Latino culture. So for some people, telling their family that they're gay, it's just like they failed their family. For some, there's so much trauma involved. There's so much prejudice on this. So it is hard. But then, you know, I moved to the States 7 years ago, and I come out as a trans now. So, you know, now my role with Entre Hermanos is helping transgender on their fight for asylum. And I think there is a lot of trauma. There is a lot of things that we need to understand when it goes to the trans community that is coming to fight for their asylum. There is a lot of things that we're culturally different, and we need to have that approach. We need to have that to be conscious that, you know, we come from a different reality, and we need to be more sensitive about the way we talk to people, because as Monserrat was saying, you know, there are some people that prefer to be like in the LGBTQ spectrum. In, let's say, Mexico, we only say LGBTQ plus. We don't go beyond that. And it's easy for us to define, you know, as a chica trans or
Chica trans meaning trans girl?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's common to do that, but then there's so many. That's a spectrum, and there are so many varieties. So some people, you know, in the Spanish argot, some people would say, "Oh, that's a vestida," or that's you know, there's so many different expressions that people use.
So some people are identified by how they dress, and some people are identified by who they are in a relationship with.
Yes.
Okay.
That's that.
So, just for context, Monse was telling us how she came to the U.S. at 2 years old. So one of the things you may have experienced is what it's like to grow up in a Latin American country outside of the U.S. Can you tell us a little bit about how the LGBTQ community is seen within those other places like Mexico?
It's hard. I mean, there's this still a lot of homophobia in Mexico. There's still a lot of stigma. Back when I was growing up, there was a lot of raids in the bars, and people, people dressed as a woman. They used to put in the paper, which was a horrible thing, because if they put
Like
in
the newspaper?
they use your job. Yes.
Wow.
In the front page of the paper, and they just probably, if your boss finds out that you are, in a bar dressed as a woman, you're probably going to lose your job. So, and your family probably will kick you out of your house if they find out that you were in that situation. So there was a lot of secrecy, there was a lot of stigma, so I say, and there was a lot of legal and social problems because of that. So it was not easy. It was not easy, no, but it was really hard growing up, especially when you want to express your own gender, you want to express, you want to have your own, you want to express your identity, and you're not able because the society tells otherwise. So it was hard. The situation has changed a little, not much. Now people are a little more open, but there's still a lot of resistance to the change. There's still a lot of homophobia. There is a lot of trans feminicidium. There's lots of trans people.
Trans femicide, you said?
And, yes. Yeah, that's still a high numbers. And technically, we have a
I want to
human rights
actually.
commission.
I just want to quickly, sorry, I want to quickly interrupt us. I don't know if the community who's listening knows what trans femicide is. Femicide is the phenomenon of men killing women because they are women, and it's unfortunately rampant in some of the countries where people are frequently fleeing from. Trans femicide is specifically killing of trans women. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Like quick description? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, so there's still so many stigma. There's people being kicked from their houses, losing their jobs because of that, and there's also the social stigma. Being as a trans woman, I had suffered that, and it was not easy. It was hard.
Now, is there any difference between growing up in a kind of a fairly affluent neighborhood or family in Latin America and ending up being a member of the LGBTQ community, and maybe growing up in a remote village as an Indigenous person and ending up being a member?
For one, if you are part of a rich family or a family, you probably have a higher education, so it's going to be probably more understanding, and you're going to be in a better position. And if you have money, you have a position of power in society. But if you are from a little village, or you are just a working class person, that changes totally, because you are exposed to the everyday routine, to getting into the public transportation to go to work, and if you are totally open, you're gonna get a lot of heat because of that.
And what are some considerations specific to Indigenous Latin American communities, and being trans or gay or bisexual or queer or anywhere along the spectrum of non-cis heteronormative?
So historically in Mexico, in the communities, they are natives. Let's say from native communities from Chiapas, from Oaxaca, that they speak their own tongue, their own language. There's a lot of understanding. There are some communities like in Oaxaca where they have the moxas, which are like a trans woman, and they're totally socially accepted. But in my community, I grew up in a Yaqui community in the north of Mexico, in Sonora. So I am part of the Yaqui people, and we didn't have that much problem in the community. But we have to go out to the world after to go to school and to do life work outside the community. So in the community, my family, I didn't have a problem with my family accepting me the way I was. But I have to leave my house somehow, at some point, and going to even the big city, and that changed everything. Especially when you're so used to your community where everybody accepted where you are, and you don't have any bad feedback about yourself. But moving to a big city where everything changes, especially when you are just a working person trying to make a living in the big city.
Thank you so much. So now that we have two panelists with us, I would like to go ahead and ask, what does a non-Latino LGBT person who is LGBTQ need to know when working with Latino or Latinx LGBTQ people, especially in the context of, say, a legal clinic? So, Monse, Silah. Monse, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Kelsey, before we dive into this question,
Sure. I actually just put it on the link box, a report that I was referring to. Oh.
Yeah, so thanks, sorry, Monse. Before we dive into this question, Kelsey, why don't would it be possible for me to send the phone information link to Silah so that she can call in directly? That might make I think we've been able to hear most of what she's saying, but I want to make sure. No, it was a very creative solution. Thank you. No, Silah, you're fine. I missed the ball and should have connected this earlier. So Silah, I'm going to email you right now the call-in information, and it just has a code for you to enter, and then I just want to make sure that everybody can hear everything that you're saying.
Okay.
And say I will. I'm going to link the United We Dream thing into the chat that you just that you had just posted, because that's really a really helpful report.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Well, Silah joined us on the Zoom. I wanted to share a little bit more of the findings that we had, and this is a report that's 5 years old, but I think still has functioned a lot of it in my has informed my organizing. Even as we build the LGBTQ Immigrant and Refugee Coalition. And please let me know if I disconnect, because sometimes my internet gets a little unstable. And so one of the major things that this report highlights is that LGBTQ immigrant communities, not specifically Latinx, are a young population living with diverse sexual orientation and gender identities, as well as immigration statuses. So we have a multi-generational audience that leans towards younger people often, and so in terms of populations, that folks are experiencing high levels of discrimination and harassment in multiple areas of life, including employment, education, healthcare, and housing. We continue to another major things that we identified as LGBTQ immigrants is that we face deep mistrust of law enforcement. And so I think that that's a broader reality for LGBTQ folks. I know that for me, my biggest mistrust of law enforcement is tied to immigration custom enforcement and Custom Border Patrol and the relation that they have with local police. And finally, that LGBTQ immigrants face difficulties navigating the constellations of different LGBTQ and immigrant serving organizations, because oftentimes we find it that we show up to spaces with parts of our identities not acknowledged or championed. And so part of the work of the LGBTQ Immigrant and Refugee Coalition has been, how do we merge both worlds of the broader LGBTQ serving organizations and immigrant rights or Latinx serving organizations to work together as one, so that different aspects of our entire being are recognized and are championed through this, understanding that sometimes both don't always have function from different parts of their strengths. And so through the LGBTQ Immigrant and Refugee Coalition, the vision was that we would be able to tackle some of that particular concern that LGBTQ Latinx folks have by being able to have one place where folks can, kind of like a one-stop shop where you're able to access LGBTQ and immigrant serving organizations, that you don't have to navigate different spaces with half of your identity present. And so that actually that we as a constellation of services are working to dismantle some of those barriers to access that we continue to present. And so that was the vision of the LGBTQ Immigrant and Refugee Coalition, and I'm grateful that it has worked, and that people continue to navigate different resources so that they're able to thrive in their lives. And so that's a little bit of what I've identified. I think when Silah was speaking earlier about her growing experiences. I know for myself, again, our reality is based on our environments. And for me, I grew up in East LA, California, where LGBTQ, we didn't have a GSBA. Is it GSBA? No, not GSBA, sorry. A GSA, right? Gay Student Alliance in our high schools. We didn't have that type of access to organizing in my growing up experiences. And so my growing up experience was very tough as an LGBTQ Latina, or as a queer identifying person who navigated the public education system in Los Angeles, California, who primarily surrounded herself or lived in the environment where Latinos were all around was my everyday environment. And so homophobia was something I faced growing up. Transphobia was something that was taught at home, and navigating that was something that I had to consistently battle. In the way that I found the tools to battle that was by, again, the resources that were available, people who I met who were openly queer. I remember coming to Seattle and for the first time meeting my first queer Latina director. And for me, it was transformative to meet someone who was queer, who was Latina, and had a director position in an organization, which we often don't see. And so I think representation does matter, even as how we offer our services and support, that it's important that we're seeing trans people in positions of power in how we're offering services, that we're seeing people who look like us and represent us in different aspects, even if it's not in how we provide the service, but in our lives, because that inspires us to widen our world and widen the possibilities of who we can become, because we have been told who we are growing up through telenovelas. We've been told through media, and often who we are based on a stereotype that didn't really represent our communities. And so part of our work now is removing those barriers to services. Oh, am I talking too fast? I can't hear you, Kelsey.
No, you weren't talking too fast, but the audio lagged and then compensated by actually speeding up. So
oh no.
It's fine.
But yeah, I would just say that there's still some work that we need to do systemically as we provide the services. And I'm grateful for this conversation again. It's a valuable conversation to consistently have as service providers, because there's still some barriers into how we provide the service. And so that's all I wanted to say.
Awesome. Silah, so happy to have you directly with us. Can I go ahead and ask you, because I know you missed part of Monse's answer, can I go ahead and ask you a little bit about what is the background that someone who is not Latino or Latinx needs to know, but who does have experience with LGBTQ folks when serving one of our clients who is in both circles? Denise, can you unmute Silah? Silah, can you unmute Silah?
Yeah, I'm trying to, and it's not letting me. That's really, I promoted her to a panelist, and let me see if I can promote her to a co-host and if that changes things. Yes.
Okay. For all of you at home, literally in most cases, Silah has finally been able to call in, and we're just having trouble getting her mic unmuted. Silah, is that, are we a go? Oh my gosh!
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, so yeah, I hear you what you say, what Monse was saying. It is good to know, when you move to the state that you see people that is trans as you are, that it's in in a power position, it's in a in a service, in a community organizing position, because mostly our people, and especially, well, I'm talking again my experiences in Mexico, mostly all the trans people that I know in Mexico or they have a really low paying jobs, or they are actually sex workers. So being here and being able to see people that is working as a lawyer, working as an organizer, working in a community, and in other places, it really changed your mind, the way you think about yourself, because you come here with many limitants. You come here with with very few expectations about what's going to be for the rest of your life. So being able to see people, not only transgender, but LGBTQ people in general working in position of power and position of of service, it make you think that there's hope for you about getting into having a better life in the States. I can hear you, Kelsey.
Sorry. Awesome. And what do you think? I know you were prepared to tell us a little bit about the kind of religious background in a lot of Latin America. Do you mind speaking to, what kind of religious backgrounds a lot of the people who we serve have come from?
Mostly our clients are Catholic, and obviously they come from families that are very traditional, and that's a problem because gay people is not well accepted in religion in general. I would say, not only in Catholic or Christians, there's not very well accepted. So being gay or transgender, it creates a lot of friction with your family. It creates a lot of misunderstanding. there are so many families that just kick you out of your house if you come out as a gay person. Or let's not say about being a transgender, and wearing female clothes or male clothes. That already changed the dynamic in the family.
Are there any other major religions that some of us who are attending this out of a place of less experience might not be aware of? I say this specifically because, when I first learned about, this is what Latin America is like, this is its demographics, this is its religious groups. Like, there were some groups that I learned later on were pretty powerful religious groups that I hadn't been aware of as that, middle school or high schooler, etc.
There's a growing community of Muslims in Mexico, and and they are really tight, and they are really, they have a really strong position about, being gay or queer in general. So yeah, I know in my own experience, friends that they were part of the Muslim community and they were kicked out of your house. They were, stigmatized and physically abused by their own family and community. Church goers members, because of their sexual orientation and lifestyle, as they say.
And how strong is the evangelical Christian movement in Mexico? I know that a lot of my clients from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras have actually come from that background. And I think a lot of people who are coming into this, white people who don't have experience with communities of color may not be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. The evangelical community is growing in Mexico. They are expanding their, their grip especially in the south of Mexico and all Central America. There you see a lot of people that are turning evangelicals because, there is a...
Hi, Kelsey.
Hey.
I was just telling everyone that I bumped something on my touchpad, like adjusting my hair, like moving, and it ended the meeting for everyone. So that was definitely my mistake. I think Silah will probably have to rejoin by phone. I don't see her on the attendee list, so I can't promote her back to a co-host. So I am really sorry, everyone.
No.
Definitely me.
Okay. All right. So, Monse, do you mind if I go ahead and ask a question, just to try and hopefully keep this relevant for those people who are amazingly hanging in with us?
Yes, of course.
So another question I have is, what do you think people who are experienced in working with the Latinx community, but maybe don't have as much experience with the LGBTQ community, would need to know when serving a client who's part of both communities?
I think one of the major things that folks should practice, and this is again how we offer our service, is always asking people just identity wise, and that doesn't mean that people will always know. Even sometimes people will feel uncomfortable with that question, but feeling comfortable ourselves with asking the question, what's your name? What are your pronouns? You don't have to go beyond there unless you feel the need, or if there's something in your respective work that you need to go into. But I think just by asking name and pronouns, it already, the question of pronouns will already just widen people's understanding, and then you'll be able to capture a little bit more of like, know more of the person. And I think oftentimes the uncomfort doesn't really fall on the person, it falls on us as service providers to be able to ask that basic question of what's your name, what are your pronouns? Beyond that, I think, you know, the more welcoming your space feels like, these are usual best practices for any, you know, service provider. I know the other day I went to Country Doctor here in Washington State, and they had a sign of how their policies do not, they don't share, you know, they just had a poster that talked how they don't share information to immigration. They had immigration resources as I was getting my blood, you know, my blood drawn. And I was reading that, and I think for me, it just made me feel that as an undocumented person, I feel extremely welcome in my clinic. And no one had to share anything that they, you know, that they didn't have to go into their politics about their immigration, but the fact that that was available there made me feel safe. And so that's also true for LGBTQ communities, right? When we have that pride flag, it's a representation that we might be in a safe space. And so I think being able to create the environment where people can become more free to speak freely. Again, in my high school experience, the only person who I ever shared that I was queer before I told the rest, you know, the rest of the public, I told myself when I was around 14, 15, and then I told my nurse practitioner in my high school when I was 17, that I was queer, because I would see a pride flag. The questions that we engaged with, she was my only form of healthcare access when I was younger. And so, and she never assumed anything about me. She always questioned, you know, when she talks about, you know, our sexual health, she talked about partners, and she never referred to a specific gender, right? I think, again, the uncomfort often falls on ourselves, and being able to widen our approach to being more, people will notice when you ask partner as opposed to boyfriend or girlfriend. People will notice and know that that's a safe space. And so, and then sometimes, you know, I think there's that's a stepping stone of building trust. You know, whenever you do build this more depth trust, being able, for example, going back into the LGBTQ coalition, and experience has been that my role has been working with our organizational partners to build this, you know, to support in supporting LGBTQ migrants who are detained. And while I'm working in this programmatic approach, I also disconnect myself from actually working with the clients, because I want to build friendships with them. And I try to distance both my client, you know, that they don't see me as someone who's giving them a service, because it's sometimes a little harder, as folks might understand and might know. And so we're able to actually build a friendship aside from it. However, I know that is not always available for everybody who has to work with people as a client. And I know that there is that protection that we, as we're providing a service, need to, it's just more like basic boundaries, and those are totally fine to have. And those are actually perfect, because there's a reason why I don't engage with people as clients in that particular program. And I try to engage more with partners so that I'm able to connect with people as friends. And luckily, awesome. I have been able to connect with people as friends.
So we've got a question in the Q&A, and I think it's a really good question. The question is, what are some of the legal impacts of COVID-19 on LGBTQ Latinx folks? What have you experienced, noticed, observed? What are some of the most pressing immediate needs? Because it's a question about legal impacts, and because most of the ones that have bubbled in through Entre, Hermanos have ended up with me and the legal team, is it okay if I go ahead and give some of the lawyer perspective first? So first of all, one of the big legal impacts is it's creating a pretty clear iceberg divide between folks who have a status and folks who do not. And so when people are thinking about, you know, work, for example, maybe you have a job. If you lose your job, do you qualify for unemployment? Well, you pretty much don't if you are a person who is undocumented. And if you have a work authorization, there are some things that are available to you then, but you know, a lot of the federal resources are only available to citizens. One huge thing that we should probably be pretty mad about as an entire community is that if you are married to a person who is not a US citizen, so like I'm a citizen, for example, my wife is also, but if my wife was not a US citizen, neither of us would be able to get a stimulus check. How do I know this? My supervising attorney, Robert, is married to a non-US citizen, and he was not able to get any of the stimulus money because of that. So, so that's pretty upsetting. It's obviously got a huge impact on mixed status families. But what we're seeing is that as everyone looks for resources, you know, food banks, okay, is this a food bank that you have to show ID? What if you don't have the documents to get an ID because you came to the US to ask for asylum and while you were on your way, you were kidnapped and your documents were stolen? Sadly, I have at least 4 clients offhand who fit that profile, so it's not as crazy out there as it seems. So, you know, it really ends up making these differences that a lot of times, you know, people are able to be accepting and, you know, it doesn't matter to me that you're undocumented, we can still be friends, but it doesn't really, that doesn't always translate to receiving services when it comes to things that are designed to go to people who have bank accounts, who are able to access bank accounts, people who have jobs that they actually file taxes for, which by the way, you don't even have to be documented to do that. You can do it with an ITIN, but you know, if you are able to file taxes, you're not necessarily able to get any money back. And now let's ask some of the actual panelists, what are some of the impacts you've seen due to COVID-19 on LGBTQ Latinx folks? What have you experienced, noticed, and observed?
Go ahead, Monse.
I think so. For just to give you context of what WISN, the coalition has been working on.
And what does WISN stand for?
Yeah, WISN is the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, and again, it's a statewide coalition. Yeah, and so one of the things that we've been noticing, what we've been working on has been, we have a community hotline where folks can call us. It's 1-844-724-3737. We revamped that hotline to be able to connect people to local resources across the entire state that are vetted and that provide, and that essentially will let people know what type of experience they would go through once they try to access that resource. If people are going to be asked for their social securities, if people are going to be asked for an ID, etc. Right? If there's people who provide language access, if they're trying to access a food bank, if they're trying to access different resources. And so we started this support since March 30th. Every single day we have been receiving thousands of calls of people asking us for support to connect them to different local resources. We've been captivating an audience of around 20,000 people who are directly impacted. And the identity that we're engaging people through primarily is as an immigrant person. There's immigrants, LGBTQ folks who are immigrants, and so LGBTQ folks have also been recipients of this support. And again, what we as WISN have been offering has been tools to navigate this pandemic so that they're able to come out healthy and safe with their communities. And the major things that people are requesting under COVID-19 in terms of support is rental assistance, access to food, and then navigating essential worker public conditions, safety conditions. And so those are people who are still deemed essential workers, who are afraid or have high risk of being exposed to COVID-19, and that their employer might not be following safety measures where they are questioning what are their rights and what should they be, how can they get care. The fourth major thing is then healthcare access. We haven't yet identified a trend of LGBTQ specific. There's a specific need for LGBTQ people, but I'm sure there is a need for immigrant folks. And so by nature, then I'm assuming that there will be a need for LGBTQ Latinx folks. But it has been primarily for the elder community who has been needing specifically navigating healthcare access. and the needs to be able to have a supportive network to then be able to get the care that they need. But for the broader community is rental assistance, food access, and worker protection.
Thank you so much. Silah, do you have anything to add to that? I know we've got a couple minutes.
First of all, I'm a big fan of YCM because they do an awesome job and they put together a big reference list of resources. So thank you, Monserrat, thank you all your team, because that's an awesome, resource. Yes, I have mostly of my clients that work in restaurants, and they've been laid off, of course, through the season. So mostly of their needs are rental assistance, and like everybody else, they are afraid to be, infected. So I wish there were more testing available, and because many of them don't have access to, health services. So that's one thing that people are concerned about it. Rental assistance, as I say, is another one. And right now, access to food, because some of the food banks have the waiting list, so you can actually get enrolled in the waiting list. There are some more that require some kind of documentation or a social security or, state ID. And that creates a bottleneck for some of our clients too. And hopefully we have a better access to service, especially health services. So people don't be afraid of going get tested or going to the clinic and do, your regular checkups. There's some folks that are, they have medical conditions and they keep going to the doctor and keep going to be seen in the clinics. So hopefully we have a better system and a better support to those folks.
All right, well, we've got very limited time left. So I just want to ask, as a, your final 1 minute wrap up, what would you like to take this time to plug that people who want to be supportive of the LGBTQ, Latino, Latinx community can help support? Come on, Monse, I know you have an answer.
I'll let Silah go first because I've been speaking a lot.
Those are hard times for the Latinx community. Those are really hard times because we don't have the certainty of when the economy is gonna open. We don't know when are we going back to regular jobs. So there is a lot of frustration. There is a lot of depression in the community. So communities need that support. We need a personal approach. I'm a peer navigator, so I deal as a friend with my clients. I actually get involved in a really deep way, in a one-on-one. I do a lot of direct services, but I get involved a lot in the life of my clients, in a really deep sense.
So regarding some of the advocacy work that YSN is working on, we released a letter to Governor Inslee on last Monday, asking him to enact a worker relief fund for undocumented communities of $100 million to support communities who have been left out of safety net programs under this time. While these are very difficult times for everybody. People who are losing their jobs are facing hunger as well. This is regardless of immigration status, right? And so now imagine losing a job and not having access to safety net programs that are allowing everybody to be on life support, through this economic crisis, but also through this health crisis that we're facing. And so we're demanding or urging Governor Inslee to enact a worker relief fund for undocumented workers. So hopefully enact that decision by May 1st. So I ask that you all reach out to the governor and again, ensure that undocumented and all communities are included into the current safety net programs that are keeping all the communities to be able to navigate these difficult times. I think one of the other things that we see as an opportunity to organize and support people is, again, through the essential workers, ensuring that they are protected and that they are being given the adequate pay for their hazardous work, as well as the safety gear to ensure that they're able to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19. But in addition, we understand that the world is changing, right? I think that our way of working is changing, and it will most likely change into the near future, right? We don't know what's going to come after, or when will this pandemic be over. We don't know how long it's going to last, and the workforce overall is changing. I think that overall, we're already heading in this direction where jobs were becoming more online, but this particular pandemic speed up our timeline for many of us. And that means that a new workforce is being developed. And so part of the work that YSN is looking to do is how are we ensuring that immigrant communities, and by nature Latinx communities and LGBT communities, are geared up and prepared to succeed in this new workforce environments. And so I think that that's one of our long-term or immediate vision work to be doing under this time, knowing that the workforce overall is changing.
Well, thank you so much. What I've done too is I've taken a couple of links to some places where our clients most frequently ask for resources, and really shamelessly put them in the chat. So if anyone wants to help financially or knows people who are in a position to do so, you can look there. Also, I want to point out that those resources are also the same places where you can direct people who may be a member of this community, who you are aware of, who need assistance.
And while Kelsey's putting that in, I wanted to share one other question we got in the Q&A, which is what the term Latinx is, which we should probably have defined at the beginning. So it was a really good question. I wanted to address it before we close, since that's a good basic thing to make sure folks know, since it is very much in common usage. Does one of our panelists want to give a quick and dirty definition?
Latinx is a neutral way of call ourselves. It's beyond Latino or Latina, masculine or feminine. Latinx, it's a more inclusive way to call ourselves. So it's better to understand when you don't wanna or you don't know the gender of the one person. Is rather to, it's so good to call them Latinx instead of trying to figure it out the gender or the gender expression of that person. So it comes as a good thing, because I am very aware of my own gender expression, and I don't want to be called a he. So if somebody called me, oh, it's a Latinx, I feel better. I don't feel that like I'm being
as opposed to Latino, which implies
Latino,
that you're a man who
male,
is Latino.
or Latina, where I'm a
Latino.
female. Exactly.
And I don't know if this is a little too
I would add to that particular Latinx identity is similar to when we talk about LGBT and queer. Queer comes with this political, for me, the word queer is a political identity that when someone identifies as queer, that doesn't mean that they, their sexual orientation is a certain way or another. For me, queer is a political identity that understands that the world doesn't function through a heteronormative lens, and that the world is broader and more complex than what we have been taught to know. And so for me, Latinx is the blend of the political identity of being queer and Latino. And so it's a little bit of this merge, right? Because you don't have to be necessarily someone who is a cis man and likes other cis men to be queer. You can be a cis man who likes cis woman and be within this broader, or be pansexual and just be part of this broader political identity that the world is broader than what we think. And so for me, Latinx, it's a merge of both my political identity and my ethnicity. I think that's what I feel like oftentimes when I get the census question, are you Latino? And then I get asked, am I white or am I something? It's always confusing. But for me, it's my queerness and my Latinidad being included.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, everybody. We do have to wrap now. Thank you so much to the folks who made it through all of the technical difficulties, particularly one that I caused. I will send out a follow-up email to everyone with some with a link to a combined link for the full webinar, so folks can watch that and come back to it if you want to. We will be submitting the bar numbers that folks provided to us to the bar for CLE credit. So if you are not 100% sure that you provided your bar number, please make sure that you email that to clinic@qlawfoundation.org. And I want to take a moment and say thank you to Monse and to Silah, because you both were so generous with your time and your energy and your patience and living your beautiful, full, resilient lives. You are just amazing, and I'm really honored that we get to work with you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the invite.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. See y'all soon.
See you all.
Bye.
Bye, bye,
Thank
bye.
you. And I am now officially closing the meeting for real.
All right. All right,
Bye,
everybody. Have a great day. Bye, bye.